In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, where empires spanning thousands of star systems bow before the might of ancient alien dynasties, humanity remains nothing more than a whispered rumor, a primitive species from a forgotten corner of space that most civilizations dismiss as myth. The Zephyrian Empire, rulers of over 12,000 worlds, has never even heard the word human. Princess Lyralii of House Vorthak stands as the crown jewel of this mighty empire, her crystalline blue skin shimmering with the bioluminescent patterns that mark her royal bloodline. For 3 centuries, she has been groomed to inherit a throne that commands fleets capable of cracking planets and technologies that can reshape reality itself. Yet despite all her power, all her wisdom, all her cosmic awareness, she makes one simple decision that will change the fate of every living being in the galaxy. She chooses to spare the life of a strange, pink-skinned warrior found drifting in a primitive escape pod near the Outer Rim territories. What Princess Lyralii doesn't know is that this seemingly weak, technologically inferior being carries within him something that no other species in the known universe possesses, something so dangerous and so powerful that it once forced an ancient cosmic horror to flee beyond the edge of reality itself. Something that has been sleeping in human DNA for millions of years, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The princess thinks she's showing mercy to a lost soul. She has no idea she's just unleashed humanity's greatest weapon into a galaxy that has grown complacent in its superiority. And, when the ancient enemy returns, the one that drove humanity's predecessors to seed the earth with their final gift, every advanced civilization will discover why the universe whispered warnings about the small blue planet in the Sol system. Sometimes the greatest power comes in the smallest package. Sometimes salvation arrives not in the form of gods or technology, but in the determination of a species that refuses to quit, no matter the odds. This is the story of how one act of kindness changed everything. The warning klaxons of the Zephyrian dreadnought Stellar Dominion echoed through its crystalline corridors as Princess Lyralii strode toward the observation deck. Her tall, elegant frame moved with the fluid grace that came naturally to her species, each step causing the bioluminescent patterns along her azure skin to pulse with a soft, otherworldly light. The neural crown resting upon her elongated cranium flickered with data streams, processing dozens of reports from across the Empire's frontier territories. "Your Highness," Captain Vextor called out as she approached, his forearms working frantically across multiple control interfaces. "We've detected an unknown vessel in Sector 7 Gamma. It appears to be primitive." Lyralii's large, opal-colored eyes narrowed as she examined the tactical display. The ship, if it could even be called that, was barely 50 meters long, constructed from what appeared to be crude metal alloys and powered by chemical propulsion systems that were laughably outdated. Her people had abandoned such technology over 2 millennia ago. "Origin?" she asked, her voice carrying the melodic harmonics that marked her as royalty. "Unknown, Your Highness. The design doesn't match any species in our databases. The vessel appears to be some form of escape craft, though from what, we cannot determine." Through the massive viewing ports, Lyralii could see the small craft tumbling slowly through space. Its hull was scarred and blackened, clearly having survived some catastrophic event. Most concerning was the complete lack of response to their hails. Whatever was inside was either dead or unconscious. "Life signs?" she inquired. Captain Vextor's secondary arms danced across his instruments. "Faint but present. Single occupant, carbon-based. The readings are strange." "Strange how?" "The genetic markers don't correspond to any known species. And there's something else, the brain patterns we're detecting show unusual complexity. Far more neural activity than should be possible for such a primitive vessel." Princess Lyralii moved closer to the viewing port, her reflection overlapping with the distant craft. In her 300 years of life, she had encountered hundreds of species across the galaxy. From the silicon-based crystarchs of the Outer Nebula to the energy beings of the Proxima Cluster, she thought she had seen every form of intelligent life the universe had to offer. "Bring it aboard," she commanded. "Your Highness," Vextor hesitated, "protocol dictates that unknown lifeforms should be quarantined at a research station." "Direct contact could pose risks to, I am aware of protocol, Captain." Her bioluminescent patterns flared slightly, a sign of mild irritation. "However, that being is dying. Whatever quarantine procedures we might follow would be meaningless if our subject expires before we can study it." The captain's mandibles clicked nervously, but he issued the orders. Tractor beams reached out from the dreadnought, gently drawing the small craft into the main hangar bay. Princess Lyralii watched the process with growing curiosity. There was something about this discovery that felt significant, though she couldn't quite place why. As the alien vessel settled onto the hangar deck, teams of Zephyrian technicians swarmed around it, their biosuits glowing as they took atmospheric readings and structural scans. The craft's hull bore strange markings, symbols that seemed to be some form of written language, though unlike any in their xenolinguistic databases. The atmosphere inside is a nitrogen-oxygen mix, reported Chief Technician Mordef. Primitive, but breathable for most carbon-based life forms. The occupant appears to be in some form of stasis, though whether natural or artificial is unclear. Princess Lyralii made her way to the hangar, accompanied by her personal guard and the ship's senior medical team. As they approached the alien craft, she noticed that its design, while crude, showed signs of remarkable ingenuity. The hull plating was arranged in overlapping patterns that would provide maximum protection with minimal weight, and the engine configuration suggested a species that understood the principles of thrust vectoring despite their technological limitations. "Can we open it safely?" she asked. Dr. Thys, the ship's chief medical officer, consulted her instruments. The hatch mechanism appears to be mechanical rather than electronic. Simple but effective. "However, Your Highness, I must strongly advise against direct contact until we can open it," Lyralii commanded, her patience wearing thin. Something about this situation demanded immediate action, though she couldn't explain the compulsion. The technicians worked quickly, and, within minutes, they had managed to activate the craft's manual release systems. The hatch opened with a sharp hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a cramped interior filled with primitive but functional life support systems. And there, suspended in a crude but effective emergency hibernation pod, was the most unusual being Princess Lyralii had ever seen. It was bipedal like her own species, but shorter and far more compact. Its skin was a pale pinkish hue, covered in what appeared to be some form of protective clothing made from woven fibers. The facial structure was flat compared to the elongated features of Zephyrians, with small eyes set close together and a prominent nose. Dark hair covered the top of its cranium in an untidy mass. But what truly caught her attention were the scars. This being was covered in them, thin white lines crisscrossing its visible skin, each one telling a story of survival against overwhelming odds. These weren't the neat, surgical marks left by medical procedures, but the rough, jagged reminders of desperate battles fought and somehow won. "Fascinating," Dr. Thys breathed, her instruments scanning the unconscious form. "The muscle density is extraordinary for such a compact frame. And these bone structures, they've been broken and healed multiple times, yet remain functional. This species appears to have remarkable regenerative capabilities." As if responding to her words, the being's eyes suddenly snapped open. They were small compared to Zephyrian optical organs, but held an intensity that made Lyralii take an involuntary step backward. The eyes were brown, a color she had never seen in any sentient species, and they moved rapidly, taking in the hangar, the assembled Zephyrians, and, finally, settling on her. The being spoke, its voice rough from dehydration but carrying surprising strength. The words were meaningless to the Zephyrians, but the universal translators immediately began processing the sounds. Where am I?" The translation came through their neural implants a moment later. Princess Lyralii found herself stepping forward despite the protests of her guard. "You are aboard the Zephyrian vessel Stellar Dominion. I am Princess Lyralii of House Vorthak. What is your name, traveler?" The being struggled to sit up, wincing as movements sent visible pain through its damaged body. When it spoke again, its voice carried a quality that sent unexpected ripples through Lyralii's consciousness, a blend of weariness, determination, and something else she couldn't identify. "Marcus," it said simply. "Marcus Chen. And I need to warn you about what's coming." Dr. Thys' instruments began chirping urgently. "Your Highness, I'm reading massive neural activity spikes. This being's brain is processing information at rates approaching our own cognitive levels, despite its primitive neural structure." Marcus, she liked the sound of the alien name, tried to stand but collapsed back into the pod. However, his eyes never left hers. "How long was I out? What's the date?" "By our calendar, it is the 847th cycle of the Crimson Star." However, we do not know when your journey began. Something flickered across Marcus's scarred features, an expression of pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. Too long, he whispered. I've been drifting for too long. They could be here already. Who? Princess Lyralii asked, though something deep in her genetic memory stirred uneasily at the question. The Devourers, Marcus said, and the universal translator seemed to struggle with the concept behind the word. The ones who consume reality itself. My people called them the Endless Hunger. We've been fighting them for longer than your civilization has existed. Captain Vextor, who had followed the princess to the hangar, stepped forward with obvious skepticism. Impossible. Our empire spans 12,000 star systems. Our historical records go back 50,000 years. There are no species older than us in this galaxy, and certainly none capable of fighting beings that could threaten the Zephyrian Empire. Marcus's laugh was bitter and completely devoid of humor. 12,000 systems? Kid, there are more than 400 billion stars in this galaxy alone. You think you've seen everything because you control a tiny corner of one spiral arm? The casual dismissal of their mighty empire sent shocked ripples through the assembled Zephyrians, but Princess Lyralii held up a hand to forestall any angry responses. There was something in Marcus's voice, a weight of knowledge and experience that couldn't be faked. Tell me about your people, she said gently. Marcus closed his brown eyes for a moment, and, when he opened them again, they held depths of sorrow that made Lyralii's heart ache. We came from a small blue planet on the edge of nowhere. Sol System, Orion Arm. Most civilizations never bothered to explore that far out because there was nothing valuable there. Just a young star with a few rocky planets. Came from? Dr. Thyssera asked. Past tense? Earth is gone, Marcus said flatly. Has been for too long. The Devourers found us eventually, just like they found everyone else who got too advanced, too noticeable. But we gave them a fight they weren't expecting. He struggled to sit up again, and this time managed to remain upright despite obvious pain. See, most civilizations develop along predictable paths. They get smarter, build bigger ships, create more efficient technologies. When the Devourers come, they fight with superior firepower and advanced tactics. And they always lose, because the Devourers have been doing this for millions of years across thousands of galaxies. But, humans, he continued, humans are different. We didn't get where we are through being the smartest or the strongest. We got there through being too stupid to quit when any reasonable species would have given up. Princess Lyralii found herself drawn closer despite the continued protests of her security detail. What do you mean? Marcus gestured weakly to his scarred body. Look at me. Look at what I am. I'm not particularly tall, not particularly strong, not particularly fast. My species doesn't have natural armor or claws or bioluminescent skin that can process data. We're just stubbornly persistent. When the Devourers hit Earth, they expected us to fold like everyone else. Instead, we kept fighting even when our fleets were destroyed, our planets were burning, and our technology was proving useless. We fought in our atmosphere, we fought in our cities, we fought in our oceans. When they destroyed our ships, we built new ones. When they killed our soldiers, we trained more. When they consumed our resources, we learned to fight without them. Dr. Thyssera's instruments continued their urgent chirping. The neural patterns are intensifying. Whatever this being is remembering, it's causing massive cognitive activation across its entire brain structure. Marcus didn't seem to hear her. His brown eyes stared past them all, seeing battles fought in distant stars and times. For 300 years, we held them off. Not because we were winning, we were losing constantly. Billions died. Entire star systems fell. But we never stopped fighting, and that confused them. Confused beings capable of destroying civilizations? Captain Vextor asked incredulously. The Devourers are ancient, Marcus explained. They've conquered thousands of galaxies over millions of years. They have patterns, strategies that work because they've worked countless times before. But humans don't follow patterns. When logic says retreat, we attack.
When wisdom says surrender, we fight harder. When mathematics says we can't win, we change the mathematics.
He paused, his breathing growing labored. In the end, we did something that no other species had ever done.
We hurt them. Actually hurt them.
Not their ships or their weapons, but them.
The entities themselves. Princess Lyralii felt a chill run through her bioluminescent patterns. How?
Marcus's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile, but held no warmth.
We learn to hate.
Real hate. The kind that burns through your DNA and changes you on a molecular level. The kind that passes down through generations and grows stronger instead of weaker. Most species fight to protect what they love, he continued.
Humans can do that too, but we can also fight just to make our enemies suffer.
When they took our worlds, we didn't just mourn, we swore vengeance. When they killed our families, we didn't just grieve, we dedicated our entire existence to causing them pain.
Dr. Thyssera looked up from her instruments with obvious confusion.
I'm reading massive biochemical changes in his system.
It's as if discussing this topic is triggering some form of genetic activation.
And, somehow, Marcus's voice grew quieter but more intense, that hate, that absolute refusal to accept defeat, it became something more. Something that could touch them even across dimensions.
Something that could make beings of pure entropy feel fear.
The hangar fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the soft chirping of medical instruments. Princess Lyralii stared at this small, scarred being who spoke casually of making cosmic horrors afraid, and felt the first stirrings of a suspicion that would change everything. The Devourers left, Marcus said finally. Not because we defeated them, but because fighting us was teaching them something they didn't want to learn. They retreated beyond the edge of our reality, and we thought we had one. But, you're here, Lyralii said softly.
Alone.
In a primitive escape pod.
That suggests your victory was not complete.
Marcus met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her understand why the Devourers had chosen to retreat rather than continue their ancient war.
They didn't give up, he said. They just decided to wait.
Wait for humanity to spread out among the stars, to find other species, to make friends and allies. Because when they come back, they won't just be fighting humans anymore. They'll be fighting everyone we've learned to care about. 3 days after Marcus's arrival aboard the Stellar Dominion, Princess Lyralii found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the galaxy. The human, she had learned that was his species name, remained in the medical bay under constant observation, but his presence had already begun to affect the ship's crew in ways that defied explanation. Dr. Thyssera approached her in the observation lounge with a datapad clutched in her primary hands and an expression of barely contained excitement on her elongated features. Your Highness, the test results are unprecedented. Explain, Lyralii commanded, though her attention remained fixed on the viewing port where Marcus could be seen through the medical bay's transparent walls. Even unconscious and connected to various monitoring devices, there was something about the human that radiated an intensity she had never encountered before. His cellular structure is unlike anything in our databases, Dr. Thyssera began, her bioluminescent patterns flickering rapidly as she accessed her neural files. The muscle fibers show signs of constant microadaptation, as if his body is perpetually preparing for extreme stress. His bone density is nearly double what should be possible for his frame, yet they retain flexibility that allows for rapid healing. She paused, consulting her datapad. But, the truly remarkable discovery is in his neural tissue. Your Highness, this being's brain operates on principles we barely understand. Where our consciousness is distributed across our cranial cortex in efficient, organized patterns, his shows chaotic neural firing that somehow produces coherent thought. Princess Lyralii turned from the viewing port, her opal eyes focusing intently on the doctor.
Are you saying his mind is damaged?
No, Your Highness.
Quite the opposite.
I believe his species evolved under conditions that required constant adaptation to extreme stress. Their neural networks appear to thrive on chaos, using unpredictable firing patterns to generate creative solutions that linear thinking could never achieve.
Dr. Thyssera gestured toward the medical bay.
In the past 3 days, while unconscious, his brain has been processing information at a rate that matches our most advanced cognitive enhancement systems. More disturbing, our monitoring equipment indicates that he's somehow accessing our ship's computer networks.
Impossible, Princess Lyralii said automatically. Our systems are biolocked to Zephyrian genetic markers.
No alien species could. That's what I thought as well, the doctor interrupted, something she would never normally dare to do. But, observe. She activated a holographic display showing brain scan data. The complex neural patterns look like chaotic storms of electrical activity, but, as Princess Lyralii watched, she began to notice something beneath the apparent randomness. There were patterns within patterns, structures that built themselves, collapsed, and reformed in new configurations. He's learning our language, Dr. Thyssera explained. Not just the words our universal translators are providing, but the grammatical structures, the cultural context, even the mathematical principles behind our technology.
All while unconscious. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's eyes opened in the medical bay.
Even through the transparent barrier, Princess Lyralii felt the intensity of his gaze as it immediately found her. His lips moved, speaking words she couldn't hear through the soundproofing. "What is he saying?" she asked.
Dr. Thyssera consulted her instruments. "He's asking if you're ready to see what humans call a demonstration."
Before either Zephyrian could respond, every light in the observation lounge dimmed slightly. The ship's gentle humming changed pitch, becoming something that resonated not just in their auditory organs but in their bones. Throughout the corridor beyond, startled voices could be heard as crew members reacted to the unexpected fluctuations in the ship's systems. "He's interfacing directly with our computer core," Dr. Thyssera breathed, her patterns flashing in alarm colors. "But that should be impossible without physical contact with the neural link arrays."
Princess Lyralii was already moving toward the medical bay. "Release him."
"Your Highness, I cannot recommend release him now, Doctor. If he wanted to harm us, he's already demonstrated that our containment systems are meaningless." The medical bay's security locks disengaged with soft chiming sounds, and Princess Lyralii stepped inside. Marcus was sitting up on the biobed, the various monitoring cables and devices automatically detaching themselves from his scarred body. When he looked at her, she noticed that his brown eyes held depths that seemed far older than his apparent physical age. "Princess Lyralii of House Vorthak," he said, and his pronunciation of her name was perfect despite the alien phonetics.
"Thank you for your hospitality.
I apologize for the computer intrusion, but I needed to understand your technology before we could communicate properly." "You learned our systems in 3 days while unconscious," she said, unable to keep the wonder out of her voice. Marcus shrugged, a gesture she had never seen before but somehow understood intuitively.
"Human brains are designed for pattern recognition under stress.
Your computer networks follow logical progressions that are actually easier to understand than the way most organic minds work." He stood slowly, testing his balance on legs that had been severely damaged when they found him.
"But that's not important right now. What matters is that I can show you something that will help you understand what you're dealing with." "The Devourers," Princess Lyralii said.
"The Devourers," Marcus confirmed.
"But first, I need to know about your people.
Your history, your capabilities, your greatest achievements. Because when they come, and they will come, we're going to need every advantage we can get." Over the next several hours, Princess Lyralii found herself sharing information about the Zephyrian Empire that was normally classified at the highest levels. There was something about Marcus that made concealment feel not just pointless but actively counterproductive. He absorbed every detail with an intensity that was almost physical, asking questions that revealed understanding of concepts he should have had no framework for comprehending.
12,000 star systems, he mused as she finished describing the extent of their territory.
Advanced biotechnology integrated with quantum consciousness matrices.
Populations in the trillions. Impressive.
He paused, and Princess Lyralii noticed that his scars seemed to have faded slightly since his awakening. "But you've never fought a war for survival." "We have conquered many species," she protested. "Our military conquest is not survival," Marcus interrupted gently.
"Conquest is what you do when you're stronger than your enemy.
Survival is what you do when everything logical says you should be dead, but you keep fighting anyway." He gestured to one of the larger scars across his forearm. This one I got holding a defensive position for 18 hours against Devourer constructs while our evacuation ships escaped from Kepler station.
The logical thing would have been to retreat when my ammunition ran out.
Instead, I learned to fight with improvised weapons made from station debris. Princess Lyralii examined the scar more closely. It was a complex pattern of healed tissue that spoke of catastrophic injury followed by what should have been impossible recovery.
How did you survive such trauma?
That's what I want to show you, Marcus said.
But, I'll need access to your genetics laboratory.
Dr. Thys, who had been monitoring the conversation through her instruments, immediately protested through the comm system. Your Highness, allowing an unknown alien species access to our genetic research facilities could compromise. Dr. Princess Lyralii said calmly, this being has already demonstrated that he can access any system on this ship without our permission.
He's asking for access, not taking it.
That suggests a level of respect for our sovereignty that I find reassuring. She turned back to Marcus.
What exactly do you intend to show us?
The gift the precursors left in human DNA, Marcus replied. The reason we could hurt the Devourers. The reason they ran instead of finishing what they started. The genetics laboratory aboard the Stellar Dominion was one of the most advanced facilities in the Zephyrian Empire, capable of analyzing and manipulating biological structures at the quantum level. As Princess Lyralii led Marcus through the gleaming corridors filled with bioluminescent displays and crystalline storage matrices, she noticed that crew members stopped their work to stare at the human.
It wasn't just curiosity, she realized.
There was something else in their expressions, a mixture of fascination and unease that suggested Marcus's presence was affecting them on levels they didn't consciously understand. Your people can sense it, Marcus observed, noticing her attention to the crew's reactions. Most sentient species can, once they know what to look for. It's like a frequency that resonates in the parts of consciousness that evolution tried to suppress.
What frequency?
The willingness to embrace oblivion if it means taking your enemies with you, Marcus said quietly.
Most civilizations develop past that impulse because it's counterproductive to long-term survival. Humans never did. We just learned to control it.
The genetics lab's main chamber was a vast space filled with floating holographic displays showing complex molecular structures. Dr. Thys was already present, her forearms working frantically to prepare the necessary scanning equipment. Her bioluminescent patterns were flashing in rapid sequences that indicated extreme agitation. I must protest this course of action, she said as they approached. Genetic analysis of an unknown species could expose us to viral contamination, quantum pathogens, or worse.
Marcus nodded approvingly.
Good. You should be afraid. Fear keeps you alive when dealing with things you don't understand. He moved to the central scanning platform and began removing his primitive clothing. The full extent of his scars became visible, and Princess Lyralii heard Dr. Thys' soft gasp of shock. Marcus's body was a roadmap of violence-survived burns, cuts, puncture wounds, and stranger injuries that defied easy categorization. Each mark tells a story, Marcus said as he settled onto the scanning platform.
But, more importantly, each mark represents an adaptation. Human bodies don't just heal, Princess.
Under extreme stress, they evolve. The scanning beams activated, bathing Marcus in shifting patterns of light that penetrated his cellular structure.
Almost immediately, the holographic displays began showing results that made no biological sense.
Impossible, Dr. Thys breathed.
The genetic structure it's rewriting itself as I watch.
Princess Lyralii stared at the displays, trying to comprehend what she was seeing.
Marcus's DNA wasn't following normal patterns.
Instead of stable double helixes, his genetic material showed constant flux sections that folded into new configurations, sequences that appeared and disappeared like living code.
Your genetics are unstable, she said.
Not unstable, Marcus corrected. Adaptive. Human DNA carries dormant sequences that activate under extreme stress. The more impossible the situation, the more the genetic structure changes to meet it.
Dr. Thys' instruments began chiming urgently.
I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations in his cellular matrix.
It's as if his body exists partially outside normal spacetime.
That's the precursor gift, Marcus explained. Millions of years ago, when they were facing the Devourers, the precursors realized that conventional evolution couldn't create a species capable of fighting pure entropy. So they designed something else. Something that could adapt not just to physical threats, but to conceptual ones. The holographic display suddenly expanded, showing not just Marcus's genetic structure but complex mathematical equations that described reality at its most fundamental levels. Princess Lyralii recognized some of the formulas: quantum mechanics, dimensional theory, consciousness projection, but they were arranged in patterns that suggested applications far beyond current Zephyrian science. They seeded a dozen worlds with modified genetic templates, Marcus continued. Most of those worlds never developed sapient life, or the sapient life they produced was too civilized to activate the dormant sequences. But Earth. His scarred face showed that expression she was learning meant a combination of pride and sorrow. Earth was perfect. A world where survival meant constant adaptation, where the dominant species had to fight for every advantage against predators, environment, and each other. By the time we reached space, we had already spent millions of years becoming exactly what the precursors designed us to be. Which is? Princess Lyralii asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. A species that gets stronger every time something tries to kill it, Marcus said simply. A species that can adapt to threats that haven't been invented yet. A species that can fight concepts instead of just physical enemies. Dr. Thysera looked up from her instruments with an expression of growing horror. The quantum fluctuations are spreading. His presence is causing sympathetic resonances in the ship's bioneural networks. Sympathetic resonances? Princess Lyralii demanded. The genetic adaptations aren't limited to his species, the doctor explained frantically. They're designed to trigger evolutionary responses in other sapient life forms. Being near him is causing changes in our own cellular structure. Marcus nodded calmly. That's why the Devourers ran. It wasn't just that they couldn't defeat humanity. It was that fighting us was changing them. Making them more like us. And, for beings of pure entropy, becoming capable of growth and adaptation was a form of death. Princess Lyralii felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. You're saying that your presence alone could transform other species? Given enough time and stress, yes, Marcus confirmed. The precursors designed the genetic templates to be viral in nature. Not in a harmful way, but in a way that would spread the capacity for impossible adaptation across any species that came into close contact with activated humans. He sat up on the scanning platform, his brown eyes meeting hers with uncomfortable directness. Princess, I'm not here by accident. The pod's navigation systems were programmed to seek out advanced civilizations along specific parameters. The precursors knew that when the Devourers returned, humanity would need allies. But, more than that, they knew humanity would need to create new species capable of fighting alongside us. Create new species, she repeated weakly. Transform existing ones, Marcus corrected. Take civilizations that have grown comfortable with their superiority and give them the gift of never knowing when to quit. Take species that solve problems through logic and technology and teach them to solve problems through pure stubbornness. The implications hit Princess Lyralii like a physical blow. You're talking about changing the fundamental nature of every civilization in the galaxy. I'm talking about giving every civilization in the galaxy a chance to survive what's coming, Marcus replied. Because the alternative is watching the Devourers consume reality itself, one universe at a time, until there's nothing left but emptiness. Dr. Thysera's instruments reached a crescendo of urgent warnings. Your Highness, I'm detecting incoming signals from across the Empire. Multiple star systems are reporting unusual phenomena. Solar flares, gravitational anomalies, and... She paused, her bioluminescent patterns flashing in patterns Princess Lyralii had never seen before. Ships appearing at the edge of our territory. Ships that don't match any known designs. Marcus was already moving, his injuries seemingly forgotten as he pulled his clothing back on with swift, economical motions. They're here. Who's here? Princess Lyralii demanded, though she already knew the answer. The Devourers, Marcus said grimly. They've been waiting for me to make contact with a major civilization.
Now that I have, they know where to find everyone I might have infected with humanity's particular brand of evolutionary madness. He turned to face her, and Princess Lyralei saw something in his brown eyes that made her understand why cosmic horrors had chosen retreat over victory. It wasn't hatred, exactly, or anger, or even determination. It was something simpler and far more terrifying. It was the absolute certainty that no matter what was coming, he would find a way to make it regret picking this fight. Princess, Marcus said quietly, I think it's time your people learned what it means to be human. The bridge of the Stellar Dominion erupted into controlled chaos as reports flooded in from across the Empire's monitoring stations. Princess Lyralei stood at the central command platform, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through rapid sequences as she processed streams of data that painted an increasingly dire picture. 17 fleet groups have gone silent in the outer rim sectors, Captain Vextor reported, his forearms dancing across multiple control interfaces. The last transmissions from each group describe identical phenomena, ships appearing from nowhere, technologies that seem to bend reality itself. Marcus stood beside the princess, studying the tactical displays with an intensity that made the surrounding Zephyrians nervous. His presence seemed to affect the ship's binaural networks, causing displays to flicker and systems to operate with subtle variations from their normal parameters. Show me the ships, he requested quietly. The main viewer shifted to display the final transmission from Battlegroup Tython, one of the most advanced fleets in the Zephyrian Navy. The recording showed vast vessels that seemed to absorb light itself, their hulls reflecting no illumination and creating distortions in spacetime around them. They moved with fluid grace that defied physics, slipping between dimensions as if the barriers between realities were nothing more than suggestions. Devourer ships, Marcus confirmed. Though these are larger than anything we faced during the Earth War. They've been growing during their exile, feeding on the entropy between realities. Princess Lyralei watched his face as he studied the enemy vessels. There was no fear there, she realized, only a calculating assessment that treated beings capable of consuming galaxies as simply another problem to be solved. How do we fight them? She asked. Marcus turned to her, and she saw that small, humorless expression that she was learning to recognize as his version of a smile. We don't fight them. Not in any way your people would understand as fighting. Then, how we teach them to be afraid, Marcus interrupted. And we start with your crew. Before Princess Lyralei could ask what he meant, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. The main viewer shifted to show a sight that sent ripples of terror through every Zephyrian on the bridge. A devourer ship smaller than the massive vessels destroying their outer fleets but still dwarfing the Stellar Dominion had materialized directly ahead of them. Impossible, breathed Navigation Officer Theldan. Nothing that large should be able to achieve dimensional translation without massive energy expenditures. Our sensors detected no power buildup. That's because they don't use power the way you understand it, Marcus explained calmly. They feed on entropy, on the natural tendency of all systems to break down. In a universe full of organized matter and energy, they're never lacking for fuel. The devourer ship began moving toward them, its hull rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Waves of darkness flowed across its surface like living shadows, and space itself seemed to bend around it. Battle stations, Princess Lyralei commanded, but her voice carried uncertainty. The Zephyrian Empire had never faced an enemy they couldn't understand, let alone one that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of reality. No, Marcus said sharply. Cancel that order. Every being on the bridge turned to stare at him. Captain Vextor's mandibles clicked angrily. You dare countermand Her Royal Highness? Unknown alien, your protocols will get everyone on this ship killed, Marcus interrupted. Conventional weapons, conventional tactics, conventional thinking, none of that works against the Devourers. They've seen it all before from species far more advanced than yours. Princess Lyralei felt something stirring in her consciousness, a resonance that seemed to echo Marcus's absolute certainty. What do you suggest? Let me show you how humans fight impossible odds, Marcus replied. But, first, I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Princess Lyralei stared into his brown eyes and felt the weight of 3 centuries of royal training, military doctrine, and civilized response protocols all arguing against such trust. But, beneath those learned responses was something older,
something that recognized the truth in Marcus's scarred features and calm determination.
"Do it," she said.
Marcus moved to the central command console and placed his hands on the bio-neural interface panels. Immediately, every screen on the bridge began displaying patterns that no Zephyrian had ever seen before, chaotic streams of data that seemed to defy logical organization yet somehow conveyed meaning.
"What is he doing?"
Dr. Thysera whispered from her position at the medical monitoring station.
"He's thinking in human," Princess Lyralii replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "And he's teaching the ship to think that way too."
The stellar dominion began to change. The changes were subtle at first, slight variations in the humming of the engines, minor fluctuations in the artificial gravity, shifts in the bioluminescent patterns of the corridor lighting. But, as Marcus's influence spread through the ship's neural networks, the changes became more pronounced. "I'm reading massive systemic alterations throughout the vessel," reported Chief Engineer Vorthak.
"The ship's consciousness matrix is adapting to new operational parameters. But these parameters don't correspond to any known engineering principles."
"They're human principles," Marcus said without looking away from the interface. "Your ship is learning to think like a species that solves problems by refusing to accept that problems can't be solved." On the main viewer, the Devourer ship had close to weapons range and was beginning to deploy the dark energies that had destroyed countless civilizations. Tendrils of pure entropy reached out toward the stellar dominion, seeking to unmake the very atoms that composed its hull.
"Shields up," Captain Vextor commanded automatically. "No shields," Marcus countermanded. "We're going to do something they've never seen before." "What?" Princess Lyralii demanded, watching the entropy beams reaching toward them. "We're going to ram them," Marcus said calmly.
The bridge exploded in protests from every officer present, but Marcus continued speaking over their objections. "The Devourers expect you to fight defensively, to try to preserve your ship and crew. They've built their entire tactical philosophy around exploiting that very reasonable desire for self-preservation." His hands moved across the neural interfaces with increasing speed, and the ship's consciousness began to resonate with frequencies that made every Zephyrian feel simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "But humans learned long ago that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything," Marcus continued.
"Sometimes survival requires accepting destruction."
Princess Lyralii felt the ship's bio-neural networks synchronizing with her own consciousness, and, suddenly, she could perceive the battle from Marcus's perspective. The Devourer ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living embodiment of entropy, a creature that fed on the fear and desperation of its enemies. "It expects us to run or hide," she breathed, understanding flooding through her.
"Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "But we're going to attack with the one thing it can't digest: absolute commitment to an impossible goal."
The entropy beam struck the stellar dominion's hull, but, instead of unmating the ship's atomic structure, something unprecedented happened. The vessel's bio-neural networks began adapting to the entropic assault, learning to process pure destruction as just another form of information. "Hull integrity maintaining at 97%, reported the damage control officer in a voice filled with disbelief. "The entropy beams are being absorbed somehow. The ship is learning to eat entropy," Marcus explained. "Just like humans learn to eat fear and pain and impossibility. Your vessel is becoming something the Devourers have never encountered before, technology that gets stronger when they try to destroy it." But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled his hands away from the interface and turned to face Princess Lyralii directly. "Now comes the hard part. I need you to open a ship-wide communications channel." "What are you planning?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "I'm going to teach your entire crew how to think like humans," Marcus replied.
"All 15,000 of them?" Simultaneously. Dr. Thysera's instruments began screaming warnings. The neural resonance patterns would be catastrophic.
The shock to their consciousness matrices could cause permanent psychological damage, or worse.
"Yes," Marcus agreed calmly. "It could.
But the alternative is watching the Devourers consume this ship and everyone on it, then, using the information they gather to destroy the rest of your empire."
He looked directly at Princess Lyralii. "This is the choice humans face every day.
Risk everything for a chance at impossible victory, or accept certain defeat." Princess Lyralii felt the weight of 15,000 lives depending on her decision, felt the pressure of millennia of Zephyrian civilization and careful progress balanced against one human's insane proposal. Every rational thought process she possessed argued against such madness. She activated the ship-wide communications array. "People of the Stellar Dominion," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive vessel. "We face an enemy that has destroyed civilizations spanning millions of years. Our weapons cannot harm them, our shields cannot stop them, and our tactics mean nothing to them." She paused, feeling Marcus's hand rest gently on her shoulder, and, through that contact, sensed the vast depth of human stubbornness that had once made cosmic horrors choose retreat over victory. "But, we are about to learn something that no Zephyrian has ever learned before. We are about to discover what it means to refuse defeat even when defeat is inevitable. We are about to become something new." Marcus stepped forward and placed his other hand on the communications array. The ship's bioneural networks immediately began resonating with frequencies that penetrated every consciousness aboard the vessel. And 15,000 Zephyrians suddenly understood what it felt like to be human. The transformation was instantaneous and overwhelming. Across every deck, in every section of the ship, beings who had spent their lives solving problems through logic and careful analysis suddenly found themselves thinking in patterns that defied everything they knew about rational thought. Engineer Morthek, working on routine power distribution calculations, suddenly saw 17 different ways to overload the ship's engines to create a weapon capable of damaging reality itself. Security Officer Kelvar, monitoring internal sensors, realized that the ship's structural supports could be reconfigured into a massive kinetic projectile. Dr. HFY, reviewing medical protocols, understood how to modify the ship's life support systems to create an atmosphere that would poison entropy itself. But it wasn't just technical knowledge they gained. Each crew member felt something awakening in their consciousness, a willingness to embrace solutions that logic said were impossible, a readiness to sacrifice everything for goals that probability said were unattainable. On the bridge, Princess Lyralii felt her own mind expanding in directions she had never imagined possible. The careful, organized thought patterns of royal education gave way to something wilder and, far more dangerous, the ability to see victory where rational analysis saw only destruction. "Report," she commanded, and her voice carried new harmonics that made every officer respond with unprecedented eagerness. "Engineering reports that we can achieve engine overload in 4 minutes, Chief Engineer Vorthak announced." The explosion would destroy both ships, but create a dimensional rift that would disrupt Devourer operations across this entire sector. "Weapons systems show that our bioneural targeting arrays can be reconfigured for suicide runs," Tactical Officer Zethmar added. "We can't destroy the Devourer ship, but we can make it remember this encounter for the rest of eternity. Medical indicates that we can synthesize compounds that would make our crew's life force toxic to entropy-based entities," Dr. HFY reported. "If they try to feed on us, we'll poison them." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's the human perspective. Every problem is solvable if you're willing to pay the right price. Every enemy can be defeated if you're willing to become something they can't understand." On the main viewer, the Devourer ship had stopped its advance. For the first time in eons, it was encountering prey that reacted to destruction by becoming more dangerous rather than more desperate. "It's confused," Princess Lyralii realized, watching the enemy vessel's movement patterns shift into defensive configurations. "It doesn't know how to respond to an enemy that welcomes destruction." "Now you understand," Marcus said. "The Devourers are ancient and powerful, but they're also predictable. They've been fighting the same kind of war for millions of years against enemies that all respond to threats in the same basic ways. They've never encountered a species that treats impossible odds as interesting challenges rather than reasons to surrender." The communication arrays crackled as transmissions began flooding in from across the Empire. Other Zephyrian ships, somehow sensing the change aboard the Stellar Dominion, were beginning to exhibit similar behavioral modifications. The viral nature of human consciousness was spreading beyond the original vessel. "The effect is propagating," Dr. HFY reported in amazement. "Ships throughout the fleet are reporting similar consciousness adaptations. It's as if the entire Empire is learning to think like humans simultaneously." Marcus's expression grew grim. "That's the good news. The bad news is that the Devourers will adapt too, given enough time.
They always do.
This approach will work for now, but eventually they'll develop countermeasures.
Then, what do we do? Princess Lyralii asked. We do what humans always do, Marcus replied. We get creative. We become something new every time the old approach stops working. We evolve faster than our enemies can adapt.
He turned to face the main viewer where the Devourer's ship hung motionless, its entropy weapons no longer reaching toward them. And we make sure that every time they think they understand us, we show them something that makes them realize they understand nothing at all. Princess Lyralii felt something settling into her consciousness, not just the viral patterns of human thought, but a deeper understanding of what Marcus represented. He wasn't just the last survivor of a destroyed world. He was the living embodiment of a philosophy that turned evolution itself into a weapon. What's our next move? She asked. Marcus's scarred face showed that expression she had learned meant he was planning something that would make cosmic horrors reconsider their life choices. We teach them the second lesson humans learned about impossible odds, he said quietly. That sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your enemy afraid to fight you at all. 3 weeks after the first Devourer encounter, the Zephyrian Empire had become something unrecognizable. Princess Lyralii stood on the bridge of the Stellar Dominion, now serving as the flagship of what her people had begun calling the Adaptation Fleet, watching tactical displays that showed the impossible becoming routine. Where once the Empire's 12,000 star systems had operated according to millennia of careful protocol and logical progression, now each world was experimenting with technologies and strategies that would have been considered insane just a month earlier. The viral spread of human consciousness had transformed not just military thinking, but the fundamental nature of Zephyrian civilization itself. Report from Sector Command, Captain Vextor announced, his forearms working across interfaces that had been completely redesigned to accommodate the new thinking patterns spreading through the fleet. The Kepler system defense grid has successfully repelled another Devourer incursion using what they're calling probability mines. Explain, Princess Lyralii requested, though she found herself already intuiting the concept through the enhanced neural patterns that now governed her consciousness. Weapons that don't actually exist until the enemy encounters them, Marcus supplied from his position at the Tactical Analysis Station. Classic human approach, make your enemy defeat themselves by forcing them to react to threats that might or might not be real. The main viewer shifted to show battle footage from the Kepler engagement. Devourer ships advanced through what appeared to be empty space, only to encounter explosions that materialized from quantum uncertainty itself. The entropy-based entities found themselves being damaged by weapons that existed only as mathematical possibilities until the moment of impact. Ingenious, Dr. Thysera observed from her medical station, which now doubled as a consciousness monitoring center for the entire ship. They've weaponized quantum uncertainty itself. The Devourers can't defend against threats that don't technically exist until they become real. Marcus nodded approvingly. Your people are adapting faster than I expected. Most species take generations to internalize this level of creative destructiveness. Most species aren't being transformed by precursor genetic templates, Princess Lyralii replied. She had learned much about the ancient civilizations that had once fought the Devourers across multiple galaxies, and the terrible price they had paid for their foresight. Speaking of adaptation, Chief Engineer Vorthak called out, I'm receiving some rather extraordinary reports from our research stations. The consciousness changes aren't just affecting military applications. The main viewer switched to display feeds from across the Empire's scientific installations. What Princess Lyralii saw made her understand just how thoroughly human thinking was reshaping Zephyrian society. On Research Station Omega, scientists were conducting experiments that merged consciousness directly with stellar phenomena, learning to think at the speed of nuclear fusion. On the agricultural worlds of the Gamma Cluster, farmers were growing crops that adapted their nutritional content in real time based on the psychological needs of those who would consume them. In the industrial sectors of the core worlds, engineers were building machines that improved their own design while they operated. They're not just solving problems differently, Princess Lyralii realized. They're redefining what problems are possible to solve. That's the real weapon, Marcus explained. Not the tactics or the technologies, but the fundamental shift in how consciousness approaches reality. Humans learn to treat the impossible as merely inconvenient. A priority signal interrupted their observations, and the communication array activated to show Admiral Kaledan, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Navy. His bioluminescent patterns were cycling through configurations that Princess Lyralii had never seen before, combinations of traditional military authority with the chaotic creativity that had become the hallmark of human-influenced thinking. Your Highness, the Admiral began, I must report that our situation has evolved beyond anything our previous strategic frameworks could accommodate.
Explain, Princess Lyralii commanded.
The Devourers have withdrawn from 17 sectors where they had achieved initial success, Admiral Kaledan reported.
Not defeated, withdrawn. They appear to be regrouping. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Show me the withdrawal patterns.
The tactical display shifted to show Devourer fleet movements across a three-dimensional map of local space. The enemy ships weren't retreating randomly, but pulling back to specific coordinates that formed geometric patterns spanning multiple star systems.
They're learning, Marcus said quietly. Adapting to our adaptations. This is what I was afraid of. Afraid?
Princess Lyralii asked, though she found the concept of Marcus experiencing fear difficult to process. The Devourers are ancient. They've fought this kind of war before, against species that try to out-evolve them. Eventually, they developed strategies that turn adaptation itself into a trap. Dr. Thysera looked up from her instruments with an expression of growing concern. I'm detecting unusual patterns in the consciousness changes spreading through our population.
The adaptations aren't stabilizing, they're accelerating.
Before anyone could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. But, instead of detecting approaching enemy vessels, the sensors were registering something far more disturbing: reality distortions spreading outward from the Devourer withdrawal coordinates.
What are they doing? Captain Vextor demanded.
Marcus was already moving to the tactical station, his hands dancing across interfaces with desperate speed.
They're not trying to defeat us anymore. They're trying to make us defeat ourselves.
The main viewer showed what the sensors were detecting: waves of energy that weren't quite matter and weren't quite force, spreading across star systems and altering the fundamental constants of physics in their wake. Wherever these waves passed, the laws of nature became more fluid, more responsive to consciousness. They're amplifying our own adaptations, Princess Lyralii breathed, understanding flooding through her enhanced awareness.
Making the changes more extreme.
Exactly, Marcus confirmed grimly.
If they can't stop us from evolving, they'll make us evolve too fast.
Force us to adapt beyond our ability to maintain stable consciousness.
The implications were staggering.
Across the Empire, populations that had been gradually adapting to human thinking patterns were suddenly experiencing accelerated transformation. On the main viewer, reports began flooding in from worlds where the inhabitants were developing capabilities that their minds couldn't process. On Vega Prime, citizens were spontaneously developing the ability to perceive 17 dimensions simultaneously, but their consciousness couldn't integrate the information. On the mining world of Asteroid Station 7, workers were learning to manipulate matter at the quantum level with their bare hands, but losing the ability to remember their own names. They're using our strength against us, Princess Lyralii realized.
Turning human adaptability into a weapon that destroys from within.
The Devourers call it the evolution trap, Marcus explained, his voice tight with old pain. They used it against 3 different species during the Earth War. Each time, the target civilization burned itself out trying to adapt to artificially accelerated change.
Dr. Thysera's instruments began registering critical alerts. The consciousness modifications are spreading to our own crew.
I'm detecting neural pattern instabilities throughout the ship. Princess Lyralii felt it too, the human thought patterns in her mind suddenly amplifying beyond her ability to control. She could sense possibilities branching out infinitely in all directions, solutions to problems that hadn't been invented yet, technologies that existed in 17 different states simultaneously. How do we stop it? She managed to ask, fighting to maintain coherent thought as her consciousness tried to expand beyond the boundaries of individual identity. We don't stop it, Marcus replied, and she was amazed to hear calm certainty in his voice despite the chaos erupting around them.
We use it. Use it how?
Captain Vextor demanded, his own bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically as the accelerated changes affected his neural systems. By doing what humans always do when faced with impossible problems, Marcus said. He moved to the central command console and began entering commands that caused every system on the ship to resonate with new frequencies.
We changed the definition of impossible. What happened next would be studied by xenopsychologists for generations, though none would ever fully understand how Marcus accomplished it. Through the ship's bioneural networks, he began broadcasting not just human thought patterns, but human emotional responses, the specific combination of stubborn refusal and creative desperation that had allowed his species to survive contact with cosmic forces. But, more than that, he began teaching the crew to use the accelerated evolution as a tool rather than fighting it as a curse. Instead of trying to maintain stable consciousness while adapting to 17 new capabilities simultaneously, he showed them how to embrace the chaos and ride it like a wave. Think in layers, his voice resonated through every mind on the ship. Don't try to process everything at once. Let different levels of consciousness handle different adaptations. Become multiple versions of yourself working in harmony.
Princess Lyralii felt her awareness splitting into parallel tracks, one that remained recognizably Zephyrian, one that thought in pure mathematical abstractions, one that perceived reality as narrative patterns, and dozens of others that she couldn't even name. But, instead of the fragmentation destroying her identity, the different layers began working together, each contributing specialized insights that combined into something greater than the sum of its parts. Around her, the crew underwent similar transformations. Dr. Thysera became simultaneously a traditional medical officer, a consciousness researcher operating in 17 dimensions, and something that could diagnose illnesses by reading the poetry of cellular structure. Captain Vextor remained the ship's commanding officer while also becoming a tactical genius who could predict enemy movements by understanding the music of entropy. Multiple parallel consciousness, Princess Lyralii breathed, marveling at the sensation of being herself while also being several other versions of herself.
We're not just adapting, we're becoming entire civilizations within individual minds.
Now you're thinking like humans, Marcus said with satisfaction.
When reality becomes too complex for single-layer consciousness, develop multiple layers. When evolution accelerates beyond normal adaptation rates, evolve your evolution. The ship's systems began operating with unprecedented efficiency as the crew's expanded consciousness interfaced with technology in ways that transcended normal neural linking. The Stellar Dominion wasn't just a vessel anymore, it was becoming something that existed partially as ship, partially as collective consciousness, and partially as pure information. The Devourer's trap is backfiring, Chief Engineer Vorthak reported, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking from at least 3 different levels of awareness simultaneously. The accelerated evolution is making us stronger rather than destroying us. On the main viewer, the reality distortions spreading from Devourer positions began encountering unexpected resistance.
Where they met areas of space occupied by the transformed Zephyrian population, the waves didn't just stop, they reversed, carrying back information about consciousness structures that the Devourers had never encountered. They're learning that they can't predict us anymore, Marcus observed. Every time they try to trap us with our own adaptability, we adapt to being trapped. Every solution they develop, we develop 3 solutions to their solution. But Princess Lyralii, operating now on multiple levels of strategic awareness, sensed something else happening.
They're not just learning about us. We're learning about them.
Through the reversed reality waves, information was flowing back to the transformed Zephyrians, data about Devourer psychology, technology, and, most importantly, their limitations.
For the first time since the ancient war began, entropy-based entities were encountering prey that could study them while being attacked.
That's the real trap, Marcus said quietly. Not the evolution trap they tried to spring on us.
The one we've been building around them.
Every time they try to defeat us by forcing accelerated adaptation, they have to reveal more of their own nature.
Dr. Thysera looked up from instruments that were now responding to thoughts she hadn't even consciously formed.
I'm detecting massive changes in Devourer fleet positioning. They're not withdrawing anymore, they're retreating. The main viewer showed enemy ships abandoning positions they had held successfully for weeks, falling back toward the edge of dimensional space. But this wasn't the tactical withdrawal of a superior force, this was the desperate flight of predators who had suddenly realized they were being hunted.
What are they afraid of? Princess Lyralii asked.
Marcus's scarred face showed that expression she had learned meant he was about to explain something that would redefine her understanding of reality. "They're afraid that we're learning to become something they can't consume," he said.
"Something that gets stronger every time they try to feed on it.
Something that can adapt to entropy itself."
"Can we?" she asked.
"Princess," Marcus replied, 3 weeks ago you were the heir to a 12,000 system empire that solved problems through logic and careful planning. Today you're a multi-layered consciousness operating a ship that exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously while developing technologies that weaponize imagination itself." He gestured toward the retreating devourer fleets.
"If you can adapt that much in 3 weeks, what do you think you'll become in 3 months? 3 years? 3 centuries?
Princess Lyralii felt her various levels of consciousness combining their analyses, and the conclusion they reached made her understand why beings that had consumed galaxies were choosing to run rather than continue their ancient hunt. The Devourers weren't just facing a species that refused to quit when logic said they should. They were facing a species that was learning to turn defeat itself into victory, and teaching that skill to everyone they encountered. For the first time in millions of years, the hunters had become the hunted. And they were learning what it felt like to be afraid. 6 months after first contact with Marcus Chen, Princess Lyralii stood in what had once been the throne room of the Zephyrian Empire's capital world, though the chamber had transformed beyond recognition. The crystalline walls now pulsed with patterns of light that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, each pulse carrying information between consciousness layers that spanned star systems. What had once been a seat of governmental authority had become something far more significant, the nexus of a galactic mind that thought in ways the universe had never seen before. Marcus stood beside her, though his physical form was only one aspect of what he had become. Like all the transformed beings in their coalition, he now existed as multiple parallel selves working in harmony, the scarred human warrior who remembered Earth's final battle, the quantum consciousness that could perceive reality's underlying code, and something else that even he didn't fully understand yet. "The final Devourer's stronghold has fallen," reported Admiral Kael'dan through channels that bypassed normal communication entirely. His consciousness touched theirs directly, sharing not just information but the emotional resonance of triumph tempered by the weight of cosmic responsibility. The main display, itself a technology that existed partially in imagination and partially in quantum mechanics, showed the aftermath of what historians would later call the Battle of the Entropy Throne. Where once the Devourers had maintained a fortress built from collapsed realities, now there was something unprecedented in the history of the universe, empty space that had been cleansed of entropy itself. They didn't just retreat this time, Princess Lyralii observed, her multiple consciousness layers analyzing the data from 17 different perspectives simultaneously. They ceased to exist in this reality entirely. "Not ceased," Marcus corrected gently.
"Transformed. We've been fighting them wrong for millions of years, trying to destroy beings made of pure entropy. But destruction just feeds them. Instead, we taught them to become something else."
Dr. Thysera, whose medical practice now encompassed healing reality itself, shared her analysis through the Collective Consciousness Network.
"The process is similar to what happened to our own people, but in reverse.
Where we learned to adapt by embracing chaos, they learned to adapt by embracing order."
The implications were staggering.
Across the galaxy, former Devourer entities were beginning to manifest as something entirely new, beings of pure creation instead of destruction, entities that fed on bringing order to chaos rather than consuming organized matter. The ancient enemy hadn't been defeated, they had been convinced to evolve beyond their fundamental nature.
"Is that what the precursors intended?"
Princess Lyralii asked, directing the question to the quantum consciousness layer that Marcus had developed for interfacing with ancient technologies they had discovered in the ruins of Earth's solar system. "Partially," Marcus replied, accessing memories that existed in human genetic code itself. They knew that defeating entropy required more than superior firepower or advanced technology.
It required changing the fundamental nature of the conflict itself.
Through the Nexus Chamber's reality-spanning displays, they could observe the transformation spreading across multiple galaxies. Species that had never heard of Earth or humans were spontaneously developing the capacity for impossible adaptation. The viral nature of human consciousness had spread beyond anything the precursors had originally designed, creating a cascade effect that was remaking the universe's approach to existence itself. But, with that transformation came new responsibilities and challenges that tested even their expanded capabilities. The Andromedans are requesting assistance, reported Fleet Coordinator Zethmar, whose consciousness now managed tactical operations across 47 different galaxies simultaneously. Their adaptation process is accelerating beyond their ability to maintain social cohesion.
Princess Lyralii felt the weight of decisions that affected quintillions of lives across multiple realities.
The power to transform consciousness came with the obligation to guide that transformation responsibly. "What's the situation?" she asked, though part of her was already accessing the data through quantum consciousness networks that spanned intergalactic distances.
"Classic evolution acceleration syndrome," Marcus explained.
"Their population is developing capabilities faster than their culture can adapt to accommodate them. Half their worlds are populated by beings who can manipulate matter with thought, but their legal systems still assume physical interaction is required for most crimes." It was a problem they had encountered repeatedly as the transformation spread. Species adapted to human-style consciousness evolution in months or years, but their social structures required decades or centuries to accommodate beings who could exist in multiple realities simultaneously.
"Send advisory teams," Princess Lyralii decided.
"But make sure they understand this isn't conquest or conversion.
We're offering tools, not transformation mandates."
That distinction had become crucial as their coalition grew. Unlike the Devourers, who had imposed their nature on conquered species, the human-influenced alliance offered consciousness evolution as an option rather than a requirement. Many species chose partial adaptation, developing enhanced problem-solving abilities without the full multi-dimensional awareness that characterized the core coalition members. "There's something else." Admiral Kael'dan's consciousness touched theirs with information that carried undertones of concern mixed with wonder. "The deep space monitoring stations are detecting signals from beyond our galactic cluster.
Structured communications that suggest organized intelligence." The Nexus Chamber's displays shifted to show data from sensor networks that now encompassed a significant portion of the known universe. The signals were coming from distances so vast that they originated from civilizations existing billions of years in the past, their communications only now reaching receivers capable of understanding them. "Show me," Marcus requested, his warrior consciousness layer focusing with the intensity that had once made cosmic horrors choose retreat over victory. The patterns that emerged were unlike anything in their databases, complex mathematical structures that seemed to describe realities operating under entirely different physical laws. But, embedded within the alien mathematics were recurring elements that suggested intentional communication attempts. "They're trying to establish contact," Dr. Thysera observed.
"But the signals are coming from beyond the reach of normal spacetime.
These civilizations exist outside our universal framework entirely."
Princess Lyralii felt a familiar stirring of the curiosity that had once led her to spare a single human warrior found drifting in primitive escape pod.
"How many different sources?" 17 confirmed transmission points, Admiral Kael'dan reported. Each one representing what appears to be an entire universe-equivalent civilization attempting simultaneous contact.
The implications sent ripples of excitement and apprehension through the collective consciousness network. They had transformed their own galaxy and several neighboring ones, but the signals suggested that they were part of something vastly larger, a community of universe-spanning intelligences that had been waiting for their civilization to develop sufficient awareness to participate in communications. The precursors left more than genetic templates, Marcus realized, accessing deeper layers of the quantum consciousness patterns that governed their enhanced awareness. They left instructions for making contact with whatever comes after galactic civilization. Through connection networks that spanned multiple realities, Princess Lyralii could sense the reactions of trillions of transformed beings as they processed the implications. The human gift of adaptation hadn't just saved their galaxy from entropy, it had prepared them for challenges and opportunities that transcended their previous understanding of existence itself.
"What do we do?" she asked.
Marcus's multiple consciousness layers combined their analyses, and his response carried the same calm certainty that had once convinced her to trust a scarred stranger's impossible claims about fighting cosmic horrors.
"We do what humans always do," he said. "We adapt. We learn. And we refuse to be intimidated by problems that are bigger than anything we've faced before."
The decision was made collectively, through consensus mechanisms that allowed quintillions of individual consciousness to participate in choices that would affect the fundamental direction of their reality cluster.
Within hours, construction.